Hey there. So just to introduce what's happening here, Rich and I are having a conversation about the overlap between music and making music and building a community. And this, the idea for this conversation sparked at the last Micro Solidarity summer camp in Austria several weeks ago, I think, when we both had really great jams. And then I suggested, well, I appreciated Rich for, uh, being a weirdo who does music and also builds community and also appreciates the overlap between, because I am also a weirdo who does music and, all kinds of community building activities. So I do see the overlap. And where this comes from is my own realization of how being a drummer, a percussionist who makes beats for all kinds of group processes, and also being a process designer and a facilitator have a lot in common in that you are, or I am, creating a structure and holding space for like a group process to happen inside of, whether that's like contact improvisation, dancing, all kinds of rituals, or whether that's connecting to the higher purpose of what we're doing here as an organization, that sort of thing. I've started noticing how these sort of bleed into each other and how they enable me to kind of feel into some like underlying capacities where they both emerge from within me. And yeah, that is the framing of this conversation. And what do you say, Rich?
Well, it's immediately interesting thinking about you as a percussionist, where I'm more of a soloist, like I spent most of my time playing guitar. That's most of my musical history. And a lot of time playing by myself and being self-contained and doing my own thing that's like disconnected from everyone else. Whereas with percussion, it's much more like you're laying down a foundation for other things to happen on top of. And I mean, I'm sure you can have a good time by yourself, but it's not complete if it's just percussion. Usually, it's like this foundational element, and that's even more. I feel like percussion's even being a drummer is even more like being a facilitator or a space holder than being a guitarist, for example, where the guitarist can be very egocentric and like self-serving and like, oh yes, I'm great, look at me, which doesn't really work if you're doing it as a facilitator, that doesn't it kind of breaks down somehow.
Well, I would argue that if you do that as a guitarist and you're playing with other people, then it doesn't sound very well. Doesn't sound very good.
Yeah,
You
unless
still need to be like in touch with
you're Jimi
whatever
Hendrix,
else.
then you can get away with it.
Yeah.
Have you intentionally kind of mapped out any of the parallels between the two domains?
So can you repeat that?
Have you mapped out any parallels between the two
Mapped out.
domains of like music and community?
I haven't really tried to conceptualize it all that
Mm,
much.
mm,
It's mostly it's got a lot to do with honing my intuition in terms of being in the flow and really trusting that something's happening, I'm doing it, and it's going to make sense, but I don't know what it's going to be like at the end, and just jumping in and doing that. I think that's one aspect of it. Just this really trusting myself that there's
yeah.
something interesting at the end of this idea. And I think that's got a lot to do with expressing myself musically, just trusting myself that, okay, I have some tempo, I'm bound by some time signature, and then something's going to happen and it's going to be good. I just need to pay attention to what's going on around me and observe what happens. And I think I've been able
So,
to tap into this quality when I like formulate ideas also and speak to
so
people.
so this is interesting because It sounds, the way you're describing it, it sounds like you don't know exactly what the outcome is going to be, but you're not making random sounds, right? You're and you're not just purely, like you said, the time signature, or like there's some fundamental structure that you're sitting inside of. That's not the only thing that's going on. You've also got some kind of aesthetic discernment that says this is more like the sound that I want to make, and this is less like it, and you use that to navigate. Um, and that's very curious to be able to know you're going in the right direction, even if you don't know what the destination is.
Yeah. Uh,
How?
how do you do that? Well, it's not 100% reliable. I have to say that,
Yeah,
but it's the feel, it's the intuition, it's being able to see and perceive what's happening around me. As I said, when I play the drums, when I play percussion, I usually do it for a thing. When people are doing something in relation to the beat, and so on this non-verbal level, I've been learning how to pay attention to what is going on and how to like catalyze the process, how to really play with what's happening, how to enable it to shape
yeah,
what's coming up
yeah,
through me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm assuming that like sometimes the kind of influence that you can have on that activity is quite um subtle or almost invisible, that it's not, like, okay, if you're playing in a band and you're the drummer, you go faster, then the band goes faster. That's very straightforward connection. But if it's like, yeah, like a ritual, for example, and you change somehow the mood in a subtle way, it's like you're having a significant influence on where the thing is going, but no one could, or very few people could articulate like this was the cause and this was the effect. It's like it's much more ambiguous than that.
It's very, very embodied.
I think
And
that's what I'm doing a lot of times when I'm working with groups is um like a wine taster who's got this very refined palate of like, yes, it tastes like oak and this whatever. Um I think I'm doing that in a group a lot of the time, where I'm just sensing what's the vibe, like what are the different flavors, what are the patterns of attention, what are the values that are on display, what are the behaviors that are made possible, what are the taboos or the things that are excluded. And I've got some kind of direct aesthetic contact with that. That's not, it's very pre-verbal. It's not like I could make a list for you. Um, and then I naturally want to have an influence on it in the way that you would have an influence as a intuitive drummer. That I'm like, oh, it feels like this. Maybe the group feels a bit stuffy, and so then I'll be more playful. Or the group is too chaotic, and then I'll bring some more structure, or like that. There's some kind of um I'm noticing what's missing and trying to contribute that. I think that's a lot of the times what I'm doing. But it's like having access to a bunch of parameters that many people are not even they're not even necessarily aware that they exist.
would you say that there's some kind of, okay, could you see some kind of a relationship between what you just described and your musical pursuits?
Well, when I'm making music lately, the main method that I do is I make a sound. I'm doing this very slow ambient soundscape music. And so I'll make a sound that will be minimalist and very sustained for a long time. And then I'll just listen to that sound. And by really paying attention in this like very like high definition kind of way, um, my attention gets called into things, and it says it's sort of like a melody is suddenly implied, or it's like, oh, this is missing, and that tells me what my next move is. It's like just listening. Either, sometimes I can hear something. I guess it's like I never know actually if it's actually there or if it's in my imagination. But I think like when you're playing acoustic instruments, and then with a bunch of like reverb and delays and things that sort of add extra complexity to the sound forms. Like um there's all of these, there's an enormous amount of detail in there. And if you really zoom in, it's like using your ears to like zoom in to a tiny little part of the frequency spectrum. You can hear all kinds of things in there. And so I'll hear something that exists and say, oh, that's really interesting. Almost nobody could hear that. And so what I'm going to do is just amplify that, I'll add some more melody or something that really like draws out that part of the signal. Um, and and bring the audience's attention onto that thing. And I think that's often what I'm doing as a facilitator, which is like listening for what's, if we're having a conversation as a group and there's a real sense like, oh, the group is, 90% of people think the same. I'll be listening for that 10% that's very quietly saying something different. When I'm at my best, I don't always do it. When I'm at my best, I listen for that quiet minority voice and see how I can support that voice to come up louder and then draw our attention to it and say, hey, I think you hold part of the spectrum, and we're it'd be so lifeless if we didn't have that part of the spectrum. It'd be very flat and very dull. So like what is that you hold? Yeah, like trying to amplify or just like I said before, like notice what's missing and like let's have more of it, please.
Mm, that's intriguing. I like the different byteways, like drums, structure, ambient sound, frequencies, particular little detail. Yeah, I like those sound. I like ambient music and textures and the richness which can be held within minimalism.
Well, that kind of music for me is all about I am as a musician trying to train the audience to listen in a different way. And I'm it's almost like, when you give someone a riddle or something, a riddle is fun because it makes you observe your brain. You're like, oh, I'd never seen the connection between those two concepts before, or like a good, like a pun, something does that too as well. Um, that I'm trying to like by stripping away all of the detail and the embellishment and just being left with this minimal set of things. It's like, hey, there's only three things to look at, so let's look at them one at a time. And then now you're looking at the third one. I'm going to modify it ever so slightly, and you're going to notice that I'm modifying it because there's nothing to distract you. And it's like I want to draw in your awareness and show these are subtle things that you can notice that normally you would it's like um if it was a painting, normally people will go to a museum and they'll see a lovely painting and be like, wow, look at that interesting landscape. But I want you to see the brush strokes, I want you to see the technique right down there in the detail. Um, which is a lot easier when there's only one color on the wall.
Rococo style.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But then there's other kinds of music which are more, I feel like the ambient thing is quite obscure in some ways or like marginal. It's not normal music. And I think there's things about normal, quote unquote, normal music that feel more obviously like I feel more like a facilitator there. So like we had a jam. I think there was maybe 5 or 6 of us at summer camp, and we had never played together as a group, and we knew that we were going to give a live performance with an audience. And we spent maybe 5 minutes beforehand just talking about how do we want to share the sound space together, Um, and because of the nature of our instruments, that conversation is extremely easy. Basically, we're allocating roles. We're doing this rapid fire decision making process and allocating roles. And we're saying, okay, Ondrej, you can drive the rhythm. And then, oh, Nate also plays percussion, so he can embellish the rhythm that you're driving. And then we've got a violin and a cello, and they can take turns kind of being the main voice. And then I can carry the bass. Excuse me. And because of the instruments that we're each showing up with, I'm choking for some reason. The instruments that we have kind of imply the natural role to play. Whereas in other kinds of groups, I sound very emotional, but I'm not. It's just something going on in my throat. In other kinds of groups, it's not so easy to know who should play what role. You know, often in groups, we want to treat everyone that they're the same. But if everyone's doing the same thing, it's really boring and it doesn't have any um it's not interesting. It doesn't have there's no capacity for surprise. It's like, oh, okay, everyone agrees on this. Um, but ideally when the members of a group know each other very well, it becomes really obvious, like, oh, this is your instrument. Like this is what you naturally like. No one's going to argue that you should drive the rhythm. It's obvious. Like no one's going to ask the violin player to drive the rhythm. Like obviously a violin can generate rhythmic elements, but it's not the natural place for them to be leading. Like they've got other strengths. And that kind of intuitive delegation where it says you can lead here and you can lead here and you can lead here. And oh, okay, we've got two percussionists, so we can subdivide that domain and say you lead this part of it and I'll lead that part of it, or we'll take turns, we'll oscillate back and forth between us. Like that, there's something about the way that music works that allows for that delegation to happen in a very effortless way. Like literally took us a couple of minutes. And I just would love to be able to find the analog for that in, you know, like teams that are trying to work and get a project done with something that's not just about making lovely music.
Yeah, how to surface what everyone's instruments are when they're not really holding any instruments.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of that is that people don't know what they're good at as a rule. Um, because we've been trained to associate effort and value. So we think, oh, I try very hard at this, then that must be the thing I'm good at. But actually, most of the time, the thing you're really good at is effortless. It's the thing that comes most natural to you, and you don't even notice. And you're kind of like surprised that people even value it. Um, this is one of the reasons I'm always very eager to like give people appreciations and let them know, hey, this is this thing that you do that seems very organic or natural or spontaneous when it comes from you, and it has a really big positive impact, and like it's very distinctive. It's part of your instrument, you know. And I don't think it's easy to identify that for yourself.
It's very important. And we always tend to like focus on something else in other people rather than the thing which I do effortlessly. That's the good good reminder to be appreciating people for what they're doing effortlessly, but for the instrument that they're playing.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
loving these metaphors. Actually, I had a note here. Like, what's up with all the musical metaphors at the camp and outside of the camp? I believe I even heard somebody saying that we're jamming on a subject. There's a lot of
yeah,
talk about the rhythm,
yeah,
work rhythm, even the hum is a sound which is pleasurable, right?
yeah, 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 yeah. I think I bring musical metaphors because to me music is the kind of pinnacle of human collaboration, both in terms of like what you can achieve and how easy it is. Like that to me, um, like I'm sure you've been in these experiences before where you get a bunch of people together who don't need a lot of context, but there's just some minimal shared understanding about what we're doing as musicians. And then in the space, you know, it takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes to really warm up and understand each other. And then suddenly you're making just this spontaneous, improvised masterpiece that's like astonishing. And you have these moments where it's like everyone just intuitively stops on the same beat, on the same note, just like ta-da, like as if there was a composer that is telling you it's like you everyone is just responding to the same unwritten rules, the same implications are guiding us without even being consciously aware of that. Um, to me, that is it really feels like touching the divine almost, you know, it just feels so magical and so satisfying. And it can be enabled with such a small amount of structure, you know, like it helps if everyone is playing in the same key, but you don't even need people to understand what a key is. It's just like so long as there's some shared sort of tonal center, so some kind of shared agreement about what's the tempo and where's the start of each measure. Uh, Again, people don't even need to be able to articulate what those things mean. but there's just these a handful of simple concepts that if there's agreement on those, enables this like like flourishing of um hilarious fun and also beautiful aesthetic achievement. And so I'm just so eager to find ways of translating that experience to people who don't really think of themselves as musical. And I just set that as the gold standard of what a collaboration can be like. And I just imagine, why isn't organizing usually like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's like connecting to something which is greater than the sum of the parts, like very directly, and enabling yourself to be led by that thing. And when everybody does that, then something magical really happens.
There is
Yeah,
something there is something precious about sound, that it doesn't last. You know, like it forces you to be present. Like when you're playing live, obviously not when you're composing, but when you're playing live, you have to be paying attention to what is happening right now, and you can hear 10 different voices simultaneously. Um, and you can hear where's the gap where I should be fitting in those 10 voices, you know. Um, and and I wonder if that gives some guidance about how to collaborate more effectively outside of music. It's like, can we train that extreme presence, you know, that don't get confused about all the things that we said and all of the agreements that we used to have and these ideas that you've had in the past about what we were doing. Like, what is happening right now live with these people, with these, like, what's moving? If you can get really close to that current of aliveness in that present moment, I wonder if that would um make collaboration feel easier.
yeah, what comes to mind is also this part of the jam or the good jam when people are getting know to each other and they're doing something simple. That's what often happens, at least in the jams which I've been a part of, and they turn out to be really good. You start simple and you find the understanding between each other, and then you take it off. I wonder if this could be somehow translated into group processes. How do you start simple and find a shared
Mm,
understanding, a shared basis for our collaboration, which is about to kick off?
yeah, I love that. I think it's a kind of part of the process of building trust and building confidence in each other. It's like, oh, um, I'm doing simple things, but I'm gonna like, okay, I've been playing this note for the last 90 seconds, and I'm gonna switch to this note and notice, did people pay attention? Did they respond to that? And hopefully, you know, if it's going to be a good group, they're going to notice that I did something different, or you changed the rhythm slightly, and then you notice that people picked up the energy. Um, you get that confirmation, like, oh, I'm in a feedback loop. People are responding to what I'm calling, you know. And so I wonder if that's a model that you could replicate with group stuff where you give very simple instructions at first, which are like, this is an easy task to complete, but we're just checking, you know, do people listen? Do they respond to each other? Have we got these like fundamental, there's probably a handful of like fundamental skills required um, to be a member of a collective. And maybe every time we get together as a group, or every time a new group gets together, it makes sense to start at that really fundamental basic level of just like, can we do a few scales, you know, like, can we do the thing where I say something and then you repeat back to make sure you really heard what I said, or you let me know like how that makes you feel, or you know, some of these like really, you know, the way that we often will start our meetings with the check-in and just checking how's everyone feeling right now. I feel like that's one of the real basics. It's like, oh yeah, that's right, we care about each other, we know how to listen, we know how to speak from our own experience. It's just like just a warm-up round, like we're just tuning up the instruments.
Tuning out the instruments, I love that.
When you said about jamming as well, like, can we jam on this idea? I think that what I hear when you say jamming on an idea, it's um it's not too fixated on the outcome. It's not like, can we write an essay, or can we come to a conclusion, or can we, it's no, it's just like, I'm curious to hear what your instrument has to say about this idea, and what happens when we put those different voices next to each other. Does it reveal some interesting third thing? Or maybe there's nothing, but you've got to jam with people to find out if there's any chemistry.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, well, I was also wondering, when I come in jumping to another topic,
Hmm.
like how do you see, how did you perceive the musical aspects of the summer camp? Because I know it was mentioned in the retrospective also, somebody appreciated that there was space for musicians to do things. And I also think that it added something to the summer camp.
It certainly
What do you
did.
reckon
Yeah,
it
good
was?
question. I think for me, I want to do two things at summer camp. I want to have a kind of uh, a research lab, or like it's almost like a boot camp or a university or some kind of like, I want to get together with a bunch of nerds and think about group stuff together and have my brain stimulated and like notice at the meta level all of the different dynamics that are emerging in the group and compare notes with other people and make sense of it together. That's one side. And then the other side is um I want to feel completely relaxed and at ease and um in that spontaneous mode of hanging out with lovely people and just following whatever happens. Um, this like ultimate party holiday atmosphere. Um, and to me, like there's certain like fundamental building blocks to get that second thing done. Part of it is like, well, there needs to be some alignment between the people that are there. They have to have some common ground. Um, there has to be good food. That's essential. There has to be certain aspects of the architecture and the furniture that support like little clusters of activity to form. Whereas like if you were in a gross conference room or something like that with these bright fluorescent lights and all the seats fixed on the ground in rows, it's much harder to get that vibe going. Um, but another fundamental component alongside those is music, and not just music, but um, a complex array of different instruments and different people willing to, it's like, oh, I'm really strong on this instrument, or I don't really know anything, but I'm happy to play and just try things out. Like this kind of mix of different elements being available to me. Yeah, I know that I'm at my very best when there's improvised, spontaneous, collaborative music happening. Like that is a symptom of things going very well for me. So I was delighted.
I
That's the
can
short
deeply
version.
resonate with that, yeah.
Yeah. That's where I feel like satisfied with life. It's like there's no, when we're jamming, there's no problems, there's no dissatisfaction, there's nothing missing. It's like this is as good as it gets as far as I'm concerned. Like this just feels like the ultimate way to be. Um so having the chance to do quite a lot of that at summer camp for me was like super, super satisfying.
Very, very simple, very meaningful at the same time. And also I loved the fact that the music, most of the music like, emerged from the community which was present there, and then like people contributing whatever it was, and shaping it all together, and shaping it with the rest of the people who were not necessarily playing music, but who were also part of it in some kind of a fashion. It kind of, yeah, it gives this like a social glue which works on
Mm.
a different level than everything else that is happening in the space. And I think it's quite important.
I think that there's a feedback loop between audience and performer, and it if the audience can, like obviously the performer can kind of generate this for themselves if they're really confident, but ideally the audience is like generating a field of enthusiasm and acceptance. And and when the performer recognizes like, oh, I don't have to worry about being punished or like criticized, or like people are just happy to see me explore, I don't have to get everything right or like be very accomplished. um Feeling that sense of just enthusiastic acceptance from the person on the other side of the room actually relaxes something in me in a way that actually brings out the best performance anyway. And then I'm performing a lot better. And then they're like not just projecting enthusiasm and acceptance, but actually just like being really stoked with what's happening. and then I see that they're stoked, and then I play even better. And you know, like there's this kind of, I don't think the musicians would have had such a good time playing together if everyone else was sarcastic or judgmental or like really, you know, if it was like, I don't know, a traditional jazz club or something where people are sort of showing up there to count how many notes you can play, and having that kind of more sophisticated attitude is like, yeah, it was like a team sport.
Dude, I can really resonate with what you said about this this resonance between you and the audience, and with the audience is very receptive. It brings something else that it feels like I'm not even able to reach it myself without the
Mm,
people being there and receiving it and creating it with me. Like
mm,
sometimes I'm like surprised, like, okay, this came out. That's like awesome. I haven't played that before. And it was because there were these people doing this particular thing, and it brought out that thing out of me. I like how I can like open myself up to that and just let it all happen and observe it as it happens, and
uh-huh.
not control it all that much. And yes, you're right that the crowd there was exactly the kind of crowd which enables this to happen. And for me, it's like one of the best feelings ever, I think. Yeah, definitely.
I feel like when you say like opening myself up and letting it happen, it's like um it's like I'm being animated by the group spirit. I haven't, there was a few points when we were jamming where I'm like, yeah, completely surprised, like hearing something coming out of my mouth and being like, I've never made that sound before. I never anticipated that that's the thing that I would do. If you'd asked me 15 minutes ago, it just was nowhere near on my horizon of possibilities. But in that moment, it was obviously the right thing. It was the only thing. It was the only, it's like completely fascinating. It's like absolutely the right thing to be doing. Um, and it didn't come from me, you know, it just came from the group spirit kind of knocking and being like, come on, over here, over here. I'm like, oh, okay, we're going over here.
Yeah, like come through you.
Yeah,
That's the state.
yeah, yeah. And I've done a little bit of that in outside of the musical context, in dialogue. Um, I haven't got a huge amount of experience with it, but occasionally I've been in a circle where it's been facilitated in a way that's really trying, you know, like a dialogue circle that's trying to get at the same thing, that same, like you're going to be led by the group spirit. You're not there to represent yourself. You're there to be moved, and to like give voice to something that's present in the group. And
Dialogos.
yeah, yeah, like that current that's flowing around, you know, that's not like, oh, this is my position and it advocates for certain things. It's like, no, whoa, I'm possessed for the moment by this thing and I'm going to voice it and then it's going to leave me and it's going to be someone else's turn. That is also pretty fun.
Yeah, I've been part of things like that, with a group of people who also used tons and tons of musical metaphors. It's John Vervaeke and
Uh-huh.
the circling people. They did this workshop, or they do this workshop, dialectic into dialogus, and
Okay.
one of the exercises are like the culminating exercise is what you just described, like this letting or tapping into something which is great or something which is above all of us, and letting it come through in the form of a dialogue.
So nice.
Yeah, and I could see the connection between that stuff and musicality, like definitely. And I think that you can be developing in either, like you can be reaching into it either through music or through dialogue, and you are building the muscle, whether you're doing that or that.
I still feel like um it feels like there's like quite a large gap between music and other group activities. And I would love to be able to close the gap. So like for example, as a percussionist, it's obvious that rhythm is doing something very, very deep in your when I say deep, like primitive, like some at a basic level in your consciousness, in your experience of being an aware sentient being. Rhythm plugs in very low in your stack and creates the impulse of attention of anticipation. It's like if you go boom, 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 you're immediately anticipating that next beat. And that it's not just I'm anticipating that, but everyone who hears that beat is anticipating it and it's synchronizing them. Um, so it seems obvious to me that percussion and rhythm in general, any kind of tempo, any kind of like repetitive pulse, um, kind of effortlessly entrains a bunch of individuals into a coherent collective organism because suddenly they're all paying attention to the same thing at the same time. And they'll have sort of predictable responses to changes that you might make. And that's so easy to like create that collective identity with a beat where it's like, oh, it's everyone that's grooving to the same beat. Like that's what us means. Um, Whereas with other group activities, it's harder to get that same level of entrainment. Um, I think I know how to do it at a much slower scale. So like I'm always talking about with micro solidarity, oh, if you're going to start a crew, like meet weekly for 6 weeks and give it a chance to actually so that you all start to collectively anticipate like, oh, it's Monday, it's the time that I get together with my group. And like that does a lot of work to forge a collective identity. Whereas if you are meeting approximately every 7 days, but not with a rhythmic frequency, like it's not gonna work anywhere near as well. Um, but the impact is so much more diluted when we're talking about a weekly meeting compared to when it's a musical pulse that's happening like every second or two, like that. Yeah, I wish we could close that gap somehow and give people that, draw that connection for them. Like, how you just naturally feel you want to bob your head. Like that's what it means to be part of a collective. The collective is bobbing your head.
You can start every meeting by dancing to techno together, having
Mm,
a good set, and then we start talking about strategy.
that is a very good call. That's a very good call. I've had this thought as well, actually, about in our circles, there's a lot of I don't know, people, I need to have a workshop to access my anger, or I'm going to have a grief ritual and these kind of things. And I think those are good things, don't get me wrong. But it does seem like um, before I got into all of this stuff in my peer group that I was hanging out with, like they didn't have anger workshops or grief rituals. They just had concerts where like they're getting involved in music that activates anger or activates grief, like that it doesn't need to be like a formally structured verbal container where it's like, now I want you to have your angry thoughts and like express your angry actions and emotions. It's like, no, it's just like we happen to be right now listening to some black metal and like the intensity of it is like activating your rage and you don't have to conceptualize it as such. It's just doing the job for you, that it feels more direct to me somehow.
Yeah, that resonates. I used to go to a lot of really heavy stuff in the past. And one thing I noticed was that while there was so much like heaviness and anger and guilt happening on the stage, people screaming, heavy guitars, beats, when you were outside, away from the dance floor, everybody was so chilled out, so calm.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
man, how are you doing? And like
So gentle.
like hip hop nights and stuff, it was the opposite. The music
Yeah.
was groovy and slow, and everybody was picking fights and being all angsty and stuff.
Yeah. It's like an outlet, right? It doesn't leave you charged up. It leaves you like relaxed, like you've been in the sauna.
Yeah. Yeah, I just went to mosh pit, that's my self-care.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have a secret mission that I want to introduce hippies to mosh pits. I just think it's such a great social
Yeah,
technology.
I did see you attempt.
That's a
That was
secret.
unexpected, but interesting.
It's just so fun. It's really fun. There's another musical metaphor that I wish more non-musicians had a grasp on, um, which is about harmony. Because like often when people say harmony, just like in plain English, like not speaking about music, but like um, if someone says, this is a very harmony-seeking group, or um, we had some conflict, but then the group returned to harmony. What they actually mean is unity. Usually, they usually mean like there's a kind of everyone is the same, or like there's no tension, there's no like pulling apart. Everything's like on the same track. Um, Whereas any musician, when they say harmony, they always imply at least two different things are happening simultaneously. Um, and harmony is about like how the difference is related to each other, how the two different things or three different or seven different sounds are relating to each other. Um, it's like a skillful way of relating to difference so that the different elements add up to something greater than the sum of their parts. And that to me is the promise of what a good group can do. And I always want to talk about harmony in that mode. But when you're not talking to a room full of musicians, they don't really get it. And I'm like, like the best group is where everyone is disagreeing with each other, but they're disagreeing with respect and they're attuned, they're paying attention to each other and they're making adjustments and they're like trying to find a healthy balance between them and understand like, yeah, this is basically the center of the harmony. And these are these other points that add up to something. And the whole picture is so much richer because of it. And it wouldn't be interesting to try and get everyone to agree, but can we all just get back on that center? It's like, no, that loses all the satisfaction, all of the beauty, all of the joy of it. Um, but yeah, again, it's one of these metaphors, and I'm just like, I don't know how to. I guess I just want to have some kind of basic introductory music for non-musicians workshop that we can just bring you into and just enjoy. Like, notice how good it feels to sing harmonies with people and how easy it is. Well, we can do this in our decision-making processes. When you disagree with someone, you can disagree in the same way that the tenor disagrees with the alto.
Hmm. I mean, I've been trying to bring something, but what I'm hearing is the key aspect of what I'm hearing from you is complementarity, not sameness, but complementarity and synchrony. And I've been experimenting with this in with the drumming workshops, percussion workshops. I try to encourage people to not play the same thing, to find their
Mm,
own thing,
mm,
but to play it
mm.
with the other people. It's not the same as harmony, but I think there's similarities between what you just described and what's happening there. And what I find is that, when you give somebody an egg shaker or something like that, it's a lot easier for them to contribute meaningfully with the right mindset, even if they're not really experienced, because most people do have some kind of a sense of a rhythm in their bodies,
Yeah.
especially if they go to music, dance and stuff. You have it in you. You have to be like not physical at all to not have any sense of rhythm. So this could
Mm.
potentially work. Like, and I'm enabling people to explore their own contribution, which is not the same as everybody else's contribution, but which is also in relation. It kind of happens in relation to the thing which is bigger than us.
Yeah, I love that. Complementarity and synchrony. I think you're right. With rhythm, it's easier for an untrained ear to, like if you were slowly drumming and you're playing the one and the three, it's easy for someone to hear the quarter notes or the eighth notes. It's kind of natural that if you gave them a shaker, they would start doing eighth notes probably. And they'd have to understand that concept. They would just be like, and that they're probably not going to start going out of time with you, right? Like they're just naturally going to fall in step, but they can hear, oh, we're doing different things that add up to something. That's really nice.
Cool. I
Have
was
you
reminded
done?
where
I was just going to ask if you've done like have you gone into like non-musical? I say non-musical because I think everyone's musical. But anyway, people who have you gone into groups where they don't think that they're musical and brought in musical elements to help them cohere as a group?
uh, I haven't purposefully tried to enable somebody to cohere as a group through musical means. However, we've done a bunch of workshops with my partner also, who's a singer, where the group actually does do that. Like you express yourself even if you're not an experienced musician, you start expressing yourself with your voice, and eventually you start looking for the harmony which exists in the space, and you start tapping into it, and people do experience this sense of deep connection to everybody else. But we never done it in like a group that had any kind of continuation, but it would be interesting to work with that. It would be very interesting to find people who would be down.
We did I helped with a gathering. It was kind of like a political gathering, I guess, talking about social change and stuff like that. And one of the facilitators for the whole event was a really experienced kind of like amateur choir leader, where they could just take any group of people and over the course of the 4 days of the gathering, like gradually teach the whole group how to sing this song and this lovely with lovely harmonies. And that was such a joyful thing to have like woven in through the program of the event, where music wasn't the focus, you know. It's like we're doing hard work, but we're also having this moment of like seeing what it's like to be a follower, and what it's like to have one piece of the puzzle, and that to just focus on doing your piece well, and then seeing how that adds up to something like way more impressive than any individual can access. And yeah, and how fast we can learn when we do it together. And yeah, there's all these lovely like kind of side effects from that process. I'm just from this conversation thinking I want to prototype a lot more stuff like that.
What do you reckon was the impact of that?
It was fun, which I think is really important. That like uh, when people are putting in a lot of effort to do something difficult, it's good to like oscillate between the effort and the fun, and so that it's just like it restores your energy. It gives you like this sort of like, oh, I can keep going because we're doing this other thing. And I think it's like organically or like naturally draws you towards optimism to make something beautiful together, especially with you know, it's just the voice. It's not like we had some very sophisticated equipment. It's just a bunch of untrained voices getting together and trying some things and being given really good guidance. Because if you have 30 people at an event, like there's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10 of them that are really confident singers. And if you have them distributed around and then you're leading a 4-part harmony, like it'll just naturally work. Like if you're a confident leader of the choir, you can trust that that's going to work. And I think that, yeah, I think it's empowering for people to be like, oh, we can make something beautiful together. Even if we disagree, or even if we don't really know each other very well, or like even, yeah, like I'm not a musician, or I'm an amateur in this. I'm not very experienced. I think it, yeah, shows people what they're capable of.
Yeah, making something beautiful together. I really love that.
It's
Confidence,
satisfying,
and
you
all
know.
of
It's
a
like a
sudden you're
really,
doing something beautiful.
yeah. It's just like making good memories together. And also, every time I hear that song now, I think about that event. So that's nice as well. So
What was
that's
the
like
song?
memory imprint. I don't even know what it's called. Um, it's by Sylvan Essa.
I don't think so.
I'll find the track. I'll send it to you.
Cool.
It's got this really funny line about something about my hair, and I just keep laughing because one of the guys at this gathering was like completely shaved bald, and every time we had to sing about my hair, he was always cracking up. That's really nice.
When you said that, I was reminded of these kirtans which I played for in the past, and this guy who led it goes under the name of the Hanuman Project. He also used what he called plants. He would plant people in the crowd who knew how to sing. They were the volunteers, and they would get the whole thing going. And the energy in the room was just out of this world.
Mm.
They really like encouraged others to step into that and
So
join in with the flow.
I think this is another kind of micro solidarity principle just waiting to be articulated, which is like it's just so much easier to learn a song by singing along with someone who knows it really well than by studying music theory and then reading the sheet music and kind of simulating it in your head and then attempting it on your own. And I think so much of our education, not just in music, but just throughout life, so much education gives you the sheet music instead of saying, hey, look, just sit next to someone who knows what they're doing. Like the kind of apprenticeship model, like we're gonna have a plant. Yeah, there's people distributed around the room that are very experienced with this thing, whatever the skill is. Maybe it's conflict resolution or some kind of advanced facilitation technique. Um, and if you want to learn it, you just need to sit next to them for a while, and then when it's your turn to do it, you just simulate them. You don't have to have a kind of conceptual understanding of what you're trying to achieve. You just go like, oh, what would Ondrej do in this situation? And I can just summon my little simulated Ondrej and kind of, and I'll do it in a kind of clumsy way, but I'll be failing in the right direction.
Internalizing your drama.
Exactly. I mean, this is definitely, I'm very explicit about doing this with my wife Nati, that there's been moments where I've been in a difficult situation where, like, for example, someone's, we're in a workshop or something and someone's gotten very upset. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. Well, what would Nati do? I'll just pretend to be Nati for a second and then it's easy. I just do what she would do and then it turns out pretty well. She's good at that.
I actually came across this idea a few days ago. The importance and usefulness of internalizing other people into your own cognition and trying to think like them and engage the world like them, and how it really boosts your performance and your agency and
Yeah.
everything. It's
Yeah.
quite powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I call that the impersonation theory of development.
there's a rich theory.
Yeah.
Rich Bartlett. I mean, a rich Bartlett theory.
Yeah, exactly. That it just seems like the most straightforward way to learn something is to just impersonate someone who knows how to do it.
Yeah, I like that. I've tried it. I've done it uh, on multiple occasions with my partner. Also asking, what would she do?
Yeah. Hey, I have a question. Um, a lot of musicians that I know have had, yeah, more or less of a struggle with music. Like that there's been this um that they have some sensitivities about it, or like there's a certain way um that it's easy to get discouraged. Like if the conditions are not perfect, then I find myself really discouraged and I can't play or I don't want to play or I get, I kind of my inner critic takes over or I get I trip over my own feet, and I like never find the flow. And I wondered, first of all, if you've experienced that, and then secondly, if it's interesting to explore that and see if there's any metaphors for how like how we create the conditions for easy music making, if that then informs how we do other group stuff.
When you say the right conditions, what did, or right conditions are not being met, what did you mean by that?
Well, so for example, if so Doro was at the camp and she plays the violin, and I've never played a violin in my life. And if I was curious to learn the violin, I would either need to be by myself or with someone who is very careful to not give me the feeling of being criticized. Like if
Mm.
I'm very, very new to something and then someone is like, ugh, if I got any kind of subtle sense from them that they were negatively judging what I was doing, I'd get really shut down and I'd feel humiliated and like it would completely obstruct my ability to learn the thing. Um, so like that's like an exterior condition that I need not to be interrupted by someone's critical thinking. But then there's also the interior in the same way that like if I'm in the wrong frame of mind, I just don't try and make music because I know that I'm going to be second guessing every single decision that I make, and it's not a pleasant activity to do. And there's a certain kind of self-acceptance and peace and curiosity that I need to access to have a good time playing music. And I wondered if you're the same, if you have certain conditions.
It's an interesting question. I mean, music making comes very naturally to me.
Mm.
More naturally than many other things.
Mm.
However, in order to bring it out, to not just play by myself, because by myself I can play. I need some conditions to be met. Yes, I need to be, or I want to be in a nice, pleasant space. I like playing in the forest. I like being inspired by a beautiful environment. However, if I would want to bring music to other people, I feel like I need to know what I'm doing. I don't really allow myself, how often I don't allow myself to explore different instruments which I can't really play if I feel like there's, well, loads at stake. If it's a space when we do intentionally explore things which we don't know, then yes, obviously, it's fine. However, I need to feel like, yeah, if I'm playing a beat, I need to know what I'm doing because it can be such a dominant aspect of the whole vibe. Like you can really shift the
Right.
vibe and you need to be
Yeah.
like careful about it. You need to know how to pay attention to what's going on and how to interact with that. And I've been, shit, this is quite interesting, like about this thing, encouragement or discouragement, which you pointed towards, because I've been trying to like navigate when I feel like somebody shouldn't really play and how to tell them respectfully that no, you don't grab the drum because there's 30 people who want to have a good time, and if you grab the drum, then you are the only person who is going to have a good time. Everybody else is going to suffer because you don't know what you're doing. So how do I do that in a way which is not discouraging, but which encourages this person to explore it, but in
Yeah.
maybe like a different container than what's
Yeah.
happening right now?
Yeah. Yeah. That's really challenging. I think the best answer I have for that so far is like try and find ways of like I said before about training people's awareness, like develop your discernment and your understanding of like what am I feeling, what's going on in my musical imagination, can I connect my musical imagination to like my music making capacity, how about other people responding to the sounds that I'm making, um do I want to influence the kind of response that they're having, do I want them to be more agitated or more relaxed, or and then there's this kind of like gradual process of building up competence, and just your ability to notice different things and then to be able to move them around, and that hopefully over time people would come to a similar conclusion that you're coming to, where they don't need to be told like, hey, if you do that you're really gonna kind of take over 30 people's experience. But what I just described takes a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Yeah, I agree with you on that. What I was mostly referring to, like there's this peculiar thing about percussion that's it's so intuitive, and people immediately assume that just because they have two hands and they can wave them, they know how to play drums, even if they don't. And what happens to me quite often is that somebody hears me playing, there's something happening, people are dancing or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, there's a drum which is not being played. Can I grab it?" And you only have a few seconds to deal with the situation. You don't have
yeah,
an
yeah.
entire like several month process to bring them up on the idea. So that's what I meant. Like, no, you don't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I wonder if there's a way to, like, I did this with me and Will played the siesta sound bath, and I said, I've been trying to like iterate a set of instructions to go with the sound bath, and I said, um, you're very welcome to sing along or to hum along because that's part of it, like activating the different vibrations in your chest is going to be cool. But please, just pay attention that your neighbors your neighbors have come to listen to me and Will, not to you. And so just make sure you're leaving enough space, like be conscious of your volume, so that your neighbors can hear me. And that I
Yeah,
think kind of
I
invites
remember
them
that
into a way of thinking.
it was a good framing. Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something similar that you could do when someone's very enthusiastic, where you're like, it's great that you want to learn and I'd love to support you. And just make sure that you leave enough space where people can mostly hear me because like I'm creating something, I'm creating an experience for them. Um, and here I have this very quiet, muffled drum to practice with. Because to me, it's not like, oh, you're a bad drummer or something. It's you don't know how to pay attention. That's the thing that's missing. You're like getting lost in your own enthusiasm about smashing the thing and not giving any consideration to the impact it's having on other people. That's the issue, not that you happen to be hitting, 10% of a beat too late or something. I don't care about that. But if you're paying attention and then hitting it late, then it's fine.
Attention is crucial in this. That's quite right. Yeah, I was reminded of this light music, ecstatic dance, which I facilitated a few weeks ago.
Mm.
Again, it was just very simple framing, which involved asking people not to play any instruments they can't really play. And it worked marvelously. Like it was such a great jam. I loved it. Like very simple framing on how to navigate the space, dancing wise and music wise, and managed to hold it all together.
Mm. Yeah, I get a little cringe about this thing. I only play the things you know how to play well. It's like, well,
I didn't say well. I said really play them, and I'm very particular about this. There's like it really happens with the percussion instruments more so than with any other
yeah,
instruments. People grab
yeah,
them, and
yeah,
disasters happen, and I'm very sensitive to that.
yeah. I wonder as well if there's a way. Sometimes I wonder if there's a way to let people in on your own sort of inner conflict about it. That it's like, hey, I don't want to be discouraging for you learning something, and I don't want to discourage the enjoyment of everyone else in the room. And it's like, um, that when it comes to sound, it, you can't compartmentalize it so easily. It's not like we can just do different things in parallel. It's like if you're in the same space, the both sounds are filling up the room, and so like we have to negotiate. We have to have some agreement about what's going on. Um, but yeah, I wonder if there's a way to if there's a useful way to let people in on like, hey, this is a challenge that we're navigating together.
Maybe, yes.
Maybe.
But I also feel like I'm not always open to having everybody join in, and I think that's also fine. Like sometimes
Yeah.
I want to be with a group of musicians who know what they're doing, and then everybody else can do whatever. But I don't need to make this also a workshop for learning how to do music together.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to facilitate those kind of spaces, but they don't always need to be the same. Like I'm not always open to having people on board in that
Well,
in
this
that way.
this to me is a very elegant metaphor for different decision-making methods. That like sometimes it's appropriate to be consensus building where every voice is equally important and we're just gonna like work with what's coming up and we're gonna go through the probably slow process, but we're gonna get to something that everyone has really got their own personality baked into it, and it's like something really that reflects the wholeness of the group. And then there's other times where it's like, I'm actually going to make the decision on this. I'm the leader, and I'm curious to get some input and some ideas and opinions. But like, it's a different kind of workshop right now. And I think like when you can um bring that level of clarity into a group, things just flow a lot more straightforward. But if you're not clear, sometimes you're trying to be the expert making the decision, but people think that you're looking for consensus and vice versa.
All the considerations, great ideas. I feel like I want to move on. There was this question which I noted down. Well, what do you think is an important? Or I mean, do you want to are you okay moving on from this topic, or do you want to
Yeah, yeah,
remind
yeah,
over
yeah.
something?
I wanna wrap us up soon too. So let's hear. I'm really curious to know what your question is.
Like, what do you think is the importance of a good party for activist collectives?
Um, it's that Emma Goldman line. Like, if there's no dancing, it's not my revolution. Like, it's I think the kind of the positive future that we are trying to create, um, one of the strongest tools that we have for getting there is by living it now. So like if I want to live in a world where people feel free and where they take care of each other and that they're like, I don't know, that they're optimistic and caring and these things, that like we start doing that now. And we've explored the limits of that and we see how many people we can bring into it and like that there's a correlation between the destination we're trying to get to and the way that we're getting there. And so yeah, I want to the kind of activism I'm interested in is like a world of liberty and leisure, you know, and prosperity for all, and free of domination, and this kind of this liberated self-expression, and all these kind of things. You, when we're just like fully in the hardcore brainiac strategy mode, we're not actually living. We're not living into that future that we want to be. We're kind of like calculating our way, hoping that we can get there. But for me, a good party, a good like celebration actually connects with what is the destination that we're going. Like I said before, when I'm jamming with a group of people that I'm happy with, there's no other place to be. There's that is the destination. Like there's no other place to agitate for. And it's not just jamming, it's also like um having those hilarious kind of conversations that you have sometimes when you're at a party, or dancing like a maniac, or getting dressed up in a funny way, or just any of this renewal of energy and this like release of past frustrations and the like connection with what's most exciting and creative and like novel about this group of people and what's like local to their particular culture. All these elements like to me are so nourishing. They're like getting fresh batteries into the system. So yeah, to me it's fundamental that we spend a good chunk of our time enjoying ourselves, you know. Like I'm happy to work hard so long as it's like the hard work is then kind of wrapped up with a celebration.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love this notion of living into the future that we want to live into by means of celebrating together, having a dance together and jamming together, this kind of thing. It like really feels, when it happens, it feels meaningful right here, right now, not in some abstract future kind of sense, but right here, right now. It's intriguing. Like I went through this experience in the past, which gave me or enabled me to see my life's vision,
Mm,
like where I want to go, what do I want to contribute to, and in that vision, there were simply people dancing.
mm,
I knew those people. I knew what they were about, what their pursuits in life were. But in that vision, they were just dancing. It was such a powerful vision, and it's with me to this day.
mm.
Like this wave of regenerators, people who work on regenerating the connections which we've been severing in all kinds of ways, ecosystem, social, anything, dancing together. The dance was such a powerful medium for
Yeah.
like be dancing into the future together.
And it's like, you know, we can spend most of the month going out on our own, doing work, doing this kind of hard activism and struggle and putting ourselves on the front lines. But then when we're all together, like when we've got that rare opportunity of being together, that's the time to celebrate, you know?
So is there anything that you'd love to be asked about in connection to these topics we've been discussing and it hasn't surfaced yet?
I'm just very enthusiastic in general about this topic and excited about the way that the micro solidarity network seems to be developing a musical dimension. And I'm grateful that you invited me into the conversation, and I'm looking forward to like seeing, yeah,
Actually,
what,
it was you who invited me.
well, we invited each other.
Cool.
You
Sorry for the
started it.
interruption.
You started it.
You start.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what happens as we just keep developing this overlap because I have a sort of intuitive aesthetic sense of it, but it needs to be. I think there's just a lot of potential to make it more concrete and more accessible to people who are not very familiar with music, to get an insight into like why it's so fun and that you don't have to go to music school and suffer for a long time. You can just like come in on these very easy tracks to get a taste of it. Like, yeah, I'm really excited about that. That feels so much more somehow straightforward and accessible, to do it with musical methods than to try and persuade someone intellectually about why collectives and community organizing and group process is interesting. It's just like, no, let's just do the fun thing, and then we'll explain why the fun thing is fun afterwards.
That's cool.
What about you? Is there any closing thoughts on your mind?
No, really, I just really enjoyed this conversation.
Nice.
I think we explored some interesting territories, and I'm really grateful that I got a chance to speak with someone who sees the connection between these two aspects of reality,
I
and
think there
finally
might
be
be a
able
lot
to
of us.
geek out with somebody else outside of my brain also.
Yeah, nice. All right. I've got to run. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.
Ciao, Andy.
And just mention, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it. I'm happy to like leave it up to you to make the call. I'm happy for this to be out there. I'm also happy for this to not be out there.
I want to publish it. I want to
You want
find
to?
out who are the other music geeks out there.
Cool. Cool. Thank you. Have a nice time. Say hi to Natty.
Will do. Bye, mate.
Bye.